A colossal failure by congressional Republicans to govern and pass the president's agenda and keep their promises. It's now forcing President Trump to seek out alternative ways to now get things done. Now, what you're watching unfold here is the failure that has literally pushed this president into the arms of Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. As we have explained on this show, President Trump is moving at lightning speed. He's checking those things off his list. Remember the dings last week or the week before? All his campaign promises, one by one. Republicans in the House and Senate have zero sense of urgency, no sense of accountability, and even after promising for years and years and years they would deliver for you, the American people, they have not. So with the Republican lawmakers not in his corner, well, the president has few options. He can either wait around for Republicans to get their act together, or he can try to forge ahead on his own, and that means even reaching out to Democrats. So last night, President Trump, he met with Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, and of course, once it was over, they raced with a press release saying in part, quote, "Tonight, Leader Schumer and I had a productive meeting with President Trump where we agreed to a plan to work out an agreement to protect our nation's dreamers from deportation. Now, we insisted that the Bipartisan DREAM Act would be the basis for that protection and that we would review border security measures that didn't include building a wall." Now, the president, he responded this morning. He tweeted out, quote, "No deal was made last night on DACA. Massive border security would have to be agreed to in exchange for consent. Now, it would also be subject to a vote. The wall, which is already under construction in the form of new renovation of old and existing fences and walls, will continue to be built." And then this afternoon, the president, he responded further, and he shot down the claim that a deal was in place and that the border wall would not be built. Here's the president in his own words, not Chuck and Nancy's. Watch.
And a deal. In fact, they just put out a statement. They didn't say that at all. Now, we have to have an understanding that whether it's in the budget or some other vehicle, in a fairly short period of time, the wall will be funded. Otherwise, we're not doing any deal. Now, we're not looking at citizenship. We're not looking at amnesty. We're looking at allowing people to stay here. We're working with everybody, Republican. We're working with Democrat. I just spoke with Paul Ryan. He's on board. Everybody's on board. They want to do something. We're not talking about amnesty. We're talking about taking care of people that were brought here, people that have done a good job and were not brought here of their own volition. But very importantly, what we want, we have to have a wall. If the wall is going to be obstructed, when we need the funds at a little bit later date, we'll be determining how much we need. Then we're not doing anything. Right, what we're doing is we're doing it in conjunction with the Republicans. We have a very, very good relationship with a lot of people. A lot of people want this to happen. They expect it to happen, and we'll see if it happens. But we'll only do it if we get extreme security, if we get not only surveillance, but everything that goes along with surveillance. And ultimately, we have to have the wall. If we don't have the wall, we're doing nothing.
If we don't have the wall, we're doing nothing. And then he said they were not talking about amnesty. Now, later in the day, President Trump doubled down when he got back to the White House. Let's look at this.
Just so you understand, we're renovating massive sections of wall right now, and essentially it'll be brand new. We're going to be able to use that. And if the Democrats aren't going to approve it, then we're not going to do what they want. We're not talking about amnesty at all. We have not talked about amnesty. There'll be no amnesty. We're not talking about that. DACA now and the wall very soon. But the wall will happen. Thank you.
Now, since last night, I always suspected, I know the president, and I know him pretty well. I've interviewed him many, many times, and I assumed he was negotiating last night, and he needs to continue to set the record straight. Why? Because Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi's statement, it's beyond disturbing. They are essentially claiming this, that the Democrats, they get everything they want, they get DACA, and the president doesn't get his wall. Here's the one thing that everyone needs to understand about Schumer and Pelosi. They don't like this president. They can't stand him. They want the president to fail, and they certainly don't have his best interest in heart or in mind. And Schumer and Pelosi, they only care about scoring cheap political points. Why? Because they want to gain seats in 2018. Now, remember, since 2009, Democrats have been getting destroyed at the ballot box, losing the presidency, 13 Senate seats, 64 House seats, 13 governorships, and 33 state houses. And as soon as it doesn't serve them politically, I can promise you, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, they're going to turn around and stab the president in the back. That's a fact. Also, in fact, it wasn't that long ago when Schumer and Pelosi were just trashing the president. Let's remind everybody.
The president's decision to end DACA was heartless and it was brainless.
We all agree that President Trump's decision to end DACA is a despicable act of political cowardice.
President Trump did a tweet last night and a tweet this morning. Not presidential.
He doesn't know right from wrong, true from false, American patriotism from white nationalism.
I'd like to say a few words about Donald Trump Jr. The emails are the end of the idea pushed by the administration and the president that there is absolutely no evidence of intent to coordinate or collude.
Donald Trump is a job loser. The president's fitness for office is something that is being called into question. I'm very worried about his fitness.
Now, the president, as he reiterated many times today, he is insisting this border wall be built, which he absolutely should be doing because it was a massive campaign promise he made. He needs to keep his promises. I would argue otherwise there will be severe political consequences for him and the entire Republican Party. Now, if the president doesn't get funding and get it up front first, I'd argue he's never going to get it. Let me be clear. If the wall is not constructed, the president risks losing his entire base. And it's not a matter of if, the base will leave. That's plain and simple. And that, by the way, is what Democrats want. They want President Trump to be isolated. Why? So they can bludgeon him more politically. Now, President Trump needs to keep pushing for that border wall and the funding. And he promised you, the American people, over and over again that he would get that built. For example, remember this.
We are building a wall on the southern border, which is absolutely necessary. Believe me, if we have to close down our government, we're building that wall. We will build a great wall along the southern border, and Mexico will pay for the wall. Build that wall, build that wall, build that wall, build that wall. They said, the president of Mexico said they will not, under any circumstances, pay for the wall. They said to me, what is your comment? I said, the wall just got 10 feet higher. It's true.
All right, here's where we are. The president must insist on the complete border wall funding now, or guess what? I'd argue it's never coming. Now, no one believes that the wall will be built later, if in fact they get their DACA deal now up front. It's the same old Washington, D.C. sewer swamp game. Democrats love to play this. They always promise spending cuts in exchange for tax increases. But guess what? You never get the spending cuts, and you always get the tax increase. And the same goes for immigration. We always get the amnesty, the concession. You never get the reform. You never get the border security that's promised. The Democrats, they want DACA and then amnesty for all illegal immigrants. They don't care about the wall. They never have, never will. They don't want to build the wall. So the president needs to act with great, great caution here because the Democrats have burned Republicans over the decades way too many times with these so-called bipartisan deals. Now, also, if the wall doesn't end up being built, President Trump, he will be put in great political danger. Let me give you a quick political history lesson to illustrate this point. You may remember back in 1988 when then candidate George H.W. Bush made this promise during the Republican National Convention.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
A very bold promise, and voters, they took George Herbert Walker Bush at his word, propelling him to a landslide victory over Michael Dukakis. Then, once he got into office, it was a different story for President Bush. And in 1991, he signed a bill that massively raised taxes on millions of Americans. And guess what happened? Well, he lost in 1992 to Bill Clinton. He didn't get a second term. And I have been warning about the 5 big forces that are working around the clock to destroy and damage and delegitimize President Trump. And they've been doing it from the minute he took office. For example, the deep state, they've been leaking information that is meant to damage the president. And pretty much we have a leak a day. Now, no president can work under those conditions. That's extraordinarily difficult, especially when they're leaking conversations with prime ministers and presidents. Then you have the Destroy Trump media. They've been spewing fake news and creating black helicopter, tinfoil hat conspiracy theories. They've been lying about him for months. No evidence. And by the way, they're trying to hurt the president every day. And we have Democrats like Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi. Now, this bipartisan outreach, to me, is a charade. Why? Because for months, all the Democrats have been doing is resist, obstruct, lie. They've even called him a racist repeatedly. And some have even called for President Trump's impeachment. Guess what? They want him to fail. And you know what? Then you have the never-Trumpers, the establishment Republicans. They have failed miserably every step of the way so far during the Trump presidency. And you know what? Sadly, they can't be counted on at this point. They couldn't even get enough votes to repeal and replace Obamacare, a promise they have been making for 7.5 years. And the never-Trumpers, they just want the president to fail. They always have, they always will, and they hope the president fails so miserably so they can point their fingers in everybody's face and say, we were right. I have been warning about these five forces working daily against the president. It's been happening from day one. Now we're seeing how Republicans and never-Trumpers, their inaction, their lack of urgency, it's hurting the president's ability to get his job done. He wants to keep his promises. He's done everything he could do on his own without their help. And make no mistakes, the Democrats don't want this president to keep those promises. That's not good for them. My advice tonight is very simple. The president needs to keep his campaign promises, stick to his agenda. The agenda are things that help the forgotten men and women in this country. Create jobs, lower taxes, reform the tax code, repeal, replace Obamacare, allow those multinational companies to repatriate trillions from overseas, cut government regulations, which he's done, renegotiate bad trade deals, energy independence, so many jobs with energy, 4% GDP growth, rebuild the military, build the border wall, extreme vetting, defeat ISIS, keep putting originalists on the Supreme Court, send education back to the states, fix America's crumbling infrastructure. I argue this. The key to the president's ultimate success tonight is in him keeping promises. That's what the American people elected him to do. If he does that, the economy grows. If jobs are created, if he keeps America strong, everybody wins. And the president and even all those Republicans that don't support him will all benefit politically. Now, I want to show you a few numbers. 74% of Americans disapprove of Congress's job performance. And look at the numbers for congressional leaders. Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, well, he has the highest favorable approval rating, and that's only at 35%. Not great. Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, they're in their 20s. In his home state of Kentucky, McConnell's at 18%. And these lawmakers that want to tell the president, they're the ones that want to tell him what to do? I don't think so. Now, another trap the Democrats, I think, are trying to set is on taxes. Now, listen to what the president said earlier today.
So the wealthy Americans are not my priority. My priority are people in the middle class, and that's where we're giving the big tax reduction to. It's about the middle class, and it's about jobs, and it's about bringing jobs back to the country, bringing back the companies back so that companies can get a reduction.
The president needs to avoid these Democrats and their pleas to tax the rich, redistribute wealth. And again, he needs to remember the bold Reagan-like tax cuts and the reform he promised all of us. Take a look.
We're here today to launch our plans to bring back Main Street by reducing the crushing tax burden on our companies and on our workers. We have no choice. We must lower our taxes. You are honest, hardworking, tax-paying, and by the way, you're overtaxed, but we're going to get your taxes down. We're giving you the biggest tax cut in the history of our country. I am proposing an across-the-board income tax reduction, especially for middle-income Americans. This will lead to millions of new and really good-paying jobs. These reforms will offer the biggest tax revolution since the Reagan tax reform.
Now, the president needs to follow the plan that he's already put forward. It reminds me a lot of Reagan. You got across-the-board tax cuts. You got brackets 7 to 3, 15% corporate tax rate. That makes American businesses so much more competitive than they are now. Allow the multinational corporations repatriate the trillions of dollars they have parked overseas. Let them bring it back at a low rate. They can invest in American workers, build factories, manufacturing centers for Americans that desperately need those jobs. I mentioned energy independence. It's good for national security. It'll create millions of high-paying career jobs. Do this. He's already gutted regulations. It will unleash the American economy and prosperity and growth. Remember, President Reagan, He slashed the top marginal rate from 70 to 28%. And by doing so, in the 1980s, he created 20 million new jobs. By the way, that was after the 82 recession. And government revenue, those people in Washington, well, they had almost double what they had before. And it's also a matter of fairness and simple economics. You ever gotten a job from a poor person? Look at these statistics. Now, according to the most recent IRS numbers, the top 1% in this country, they pay 39.5% of all federal income tax. The top 10%, they pay 70.9% of all personal income tax that goes to Washington. Now, that compares, look at the bottom 50%, they pay 2.8% combined. That's the bottom 50. And get this, 35% of tax filers, they have zero tax liability. Now, radical, left-wing, progressive taxation that distributes or redistributes wealth, it's been proven to fail again and again. It will never work. This is the first major test, I would argue, of the Trump presidency and has the potential to make or break it. The president's plan is rock solid. So the president actually building a wall, following up on his tax plan is so important. That's why the Democrats don't want him to succeed. Now, if he doesn't get those things done, he'll lose a lot of his base. That would hurt him, and the rest of the Republican Party, I would argue, will be in shambles, which only creates more political opportunity for Democrats. They don't want him to succeed. So, if the president does want to negotiate, what he said today about DACA, that's fine. The president, he's great at negotiating. Republicans, they pushed him into the arms of Pelosi and Schumer. They have failed the president at a very high level. And as a result, he's reached out to these Democrats. Now, this major campaign promise, I would argue, especially funding the wall, cutting these taxes, all the tax plans that the president, that I just mentioned, that he wants to put in place, those things are non-negotiable, in my opinion. If the president wants to negotiate, that's great. What he can't do is allow the negotiation away of funding the wall. He's got to get the funding and get it first. And as President Reagan once said, trust and verify. When it comes to the president, he needs to do that with the Republicans and Democrats. Get the border funding first.